Meghan and Harry's behavior has often been outlandish, narcissistic, and extremely hard, if not impossible to predict. But the theory of emotional development could be the answer that explains a lot of their shenanigans and why did they marry in the first place. Welcome back, my body language buddies. My name is Jesus Enrique Rosas. I'm the body language guy, and it would be great if you join us by just liking this video, subscribing, and hitting that bell. Let's get down to it. I've seen this question more than a couple of times. How does narcissism appear? Because some people are more prone to these behaviors than others, but there is a theory that is worth checking out because it precedes in importance what rules someone's behavior and the odds of them turning into a narcissist. And that is the 8 psychosocial stages of human development, proposed by Dr. Erik Erikson. And despite sounding like the name of a comic book villain, the man really knew what he was talking about. We all go through 80 stages of development in our physical life. It's very easy to spot them. Infant, child, youth, adolescent, teen, young adults, and elders. But the catch is that physical maturity, intellectual maturity, and emotional maturity are 3 separated systems that function and grow independently of one another. The worst problems happen with conflicts between physical maturity and emotional maturity, and you're about to understand why. Traumatic events, abuse, neglect can cause arrested emotional development along any stage of our lives, which means that you keep growing physically, but your emotional growth gets stuck and doesn't move from its current stage. This can happen even as adults, but if it happens when we are at our child or youth stages, then it becomes really crippling because you stayed at a level where your emotional maturity was almost non-existent. Emotional maturity means tools that you acquire along the way, along your life, to deal with obstacles and events that set you back. And since life is full of them, you know how important these emotional tools are. So every level of emotional development gives you a certain emotional tool. Let's pretend that the first tool that we get when we arrive at the infant stage is a megaphone. I think every parent knows what I did there. And then when we proceed to the child stage, we get a hammer. It is an useful tool, but it's rather basic and limited. But it's okay for this emotional stage because, in theory, a child only needs to deal with problems that, metaphorically, require hitting a nail with a hammer. And this is not something that parents should be extremely worried of sitting down, turning on a PowerPoint and explaining how do these emotional tools work. Because children learn the easiest way possible. They learn by example. This is good in the sense that it is not that difficult for a child to acquire these emotional tools just by imitation. But the bad part is that if the parents are an emotional train wreck, then you can imagine the kind of patterns is the child going to imitate. When a child suffers a traumatic event or a series of traumatic events, they don't know how to deal with them because all they have is a hammer. Another analogy is a healthy teen who gets a saw, which could be a symbol of their first steps at independence, something natural for their age. And suddenly they are hit by circumstances that only an emotionally developed adult could handle. And adults could have the emotional duct tape tool because you know the saying, if you cannot fix it with duct tape, it's because you are not using enough duct tape. That's why a family nucleus is so important because it serves like a buffer so children do not get exposed to problems that they cannot handle emotionally. And this has 2 directions because equally dangerous is exposing a child to traumatic events that they don't have the tools to process emotionally, or on the other hand, isolating a child from the natural problems of their age, overprotecting them so they don't even learn how to use the hammer. Now I'm trying to go slow here because I know that you are thinking right now of any number of people that you know that look like adults and act like teens or even children when things don't go their way. And you might also be thinking about yourself, about a time when you were thrown into the lions and you had to defend yourself without duct tape. It's really messed up, but this isn't even the worst part. Yeah, it gets worse. Because I put the intellectual maturity aside for a reason. Because it can also develop in a way totally disconnected and disjointed from emotional maturity. That's why it's perfectly possible to find brilliant academics, powerful CEOs, successful professionals that are emotionally immature, and because of that, they are an emotional grenade that explodes every now and then. If they suffer arrested emotional development and they manage to rise in intellectual and professional dimensions, something that is absolutely possible, the more power and outreach they have, the more dangerous they become to themselves and those dependent on them. Now, what does this have to do with Meghan and Harry? Well, for one, we cannot directly diagnose them with emotional impairment, even if we know that Harry suffered a traumatic event as a youth, and Meghan was, let's say, spoiled in many ways. And you already know that both circumstances are opposite, but both can block emotional development. What we can do is remember that despite how different are their personalities, their personality traits, you cannot question that Harry and Meghan have cooperated in really nasty things, including, most importantly, the Oprah interview and all that it has meant for the royal family. And this adds a layer of complexity to couples that you might not be aware of. It's perfectly possible that in a couple, each one has different emotional maturity. And in contrast to physical or intellectual maturity, emotional maturity is really hard to measure. So you can fall in love with this person that looks like a successful professional, and that might mean that they are responsible, but maybe they are hiding emotional immaturity. But then that's how both can grow with one another, provided that the emotional maturity gap is not so broad. But what could happen between Meghan and Harry is that if they are both emotionally immature or are crippled emotionally in similar ways, and there is no way up. They're going to stay at that level, and worse than that, both emotional impairments come from absolutely different conditions, which then makes the problem even harder to spot. Now, what is the connection with narcissism? Well, all humans need a healthy dose of narcissism. That's a given. We could not thrive as a society without it. The problem is when it becomes a disorder. People in the spectrum of that disorder react disproportionately to events that stress their self-image. Most probably because they did not have the chance to form a solid self-image at those early stages of development. And they never got to learn, much less use, one of the most important emotional tools, that is empathy. But the problem is that narcissism is the popular hot topic that everybody talks about, and arrested emotional development is not talked about as much. Maybe it needs a catchy name. And you can only imagine how much everyone could benefit if enough people understood this conflict that happens so many times when someone develops physically and intellectually, but their emotions, for various reasons, remain underdeveloped. As one of the sources of so many disorders, and at the same time why so many people don't know how to handle the influence of a malignant narcissist. At every stage of your life, it's extremely important to ask yourself the questions. Why do I feel like this? Why do I react to the situation in this way? Why some situations are so crippling for me? This is like a gym for your emotions. If you train your body to be optimal and train your mind to be efficient, then you should also develop the habit of monitoring your emotions. The most important step is observing yourself and asking this question every time you feel that any conflict overwhelms you, no matter how small. And if you think that this video could help someone you know, don't forget to share it with them. If you want to refine your observation skills, all you have to do is download my 100 body language tips right in the description of this video. My name is Jesus Enrique Rosas, and it will always be a pleasure, my body language buddies. Much love and bliss.